Hi everyone, thank you for joining us again. So I'm joined this afternoon live at Anywhere Works by Roan and Lavery. Hi Roan, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks. So Roan, you're co-founder of FreeAgent.
That's right.
Tell us a wee bit about FreeAgent and your journey to date.
So FreeAgent is an online accounting software system, predominantly for freelancers, small businesses, micro businesses. We kind of say like less than 10 employees is our sweet spot. All for people inside the UK. The company's been around since 2007, and so it's been over 12 years now since we've been around. It's been a long, long journey. Founded by myself and two other co-founders, Ed Molyneux and Ollie Heady. And first couple of years, we were kind of essentially bootstrapping the company. It was a part-time gig for us, and we were doing sort of had full-time jobs. We were doing FreeAgent evenings and weekends mostly. And then in 2009, we took our first round of investment, and that was when we really were able to sort of fully like ditch the day jobs and go into FreeAgent full time. And really, it's been kind of building the company and the product since then. So very different now. We're kind of almost 200 people in the business now. We took the company public in 2016, and it was acquired by RBS in June of last year. So we've gone through quite a lot of
quite a 12-year journey.
Yeah, it has been, yeah.
So I would love to dig into parts of that
Sure.
because of what we've discussed already this week. So this morning we kind of got into the really early stages of finding and discovering co-founders. And it might be talking about ancient history, but can you remember
absolutely.
what that was like for you guys?
Yeah, it was probably a little bit unusual in that none of the three co-founders, we didn't know each other before FreeAgent. So it wasn't like we were friends who kind of had this idea together, and it was very much like Ed, the CEO, he had this original idea based on his experiences working as a contractor and the difficulties he was having with managing his accounts and his frustration actually working with accountants at the time. So he originally had this idea, and he built like a very, very early prototype. He just almost used it as an excuse to learn Ruby on Rails as well. This was like 2006, so it was kind of quite new back then. And then he'd moved up to Scotland, he'd moved up to kind of near Edinburgh, and realised he needed to, meet other people who were going to kind of help him out with this, and in particular he was going to need some help with the design of it. And that's kind of my background. I was very interested in sort of design and UX, a little bit of front-end development. And so we were introduced, and I thought, okay, this is an interesting project. I was kind of like looking to get more, I was working as an agency at the time, and I was looking to get more into product design. So that was kind of where we got involved with that. And then later on, a little bit down the line, we realised we needed somebody who was like really strong on the technical front. Ed was good, but we needed somebody really strong. And he actually met Ollie down at what's the Future of Web Apps conference in 2006, early 2007. And then he came on board at that time as well, and so that's when the three co-founders were really kind of brought together.
I think that's so important to hear, because especially as a long-established company, you can just be like, oh yeah, co-founders are FreeAgent, off you go, and you forget like how did that actually look and feel like in the beginning. And we get a lot of questions from the community asking, oh, but I'm looking for a technical co-founder,
Absolutely.
like where do I find them? What kind of conversations do I
Yeah.
have? So that's really interesting to hear that you didn't know Ed before. Can you remember what you were thinking in terms of, well, I'm in a full-time job, why would I leave to do this thing? Like, what was your mindset around that?
Yeah, I think it's, so I think what I would say first of all is I think not knowing who your co-founders are has some advantages and has some disadvantages. Disadvantages are obviously you don't really know how the dynamic personally is going to play between, I mean, now I know Ed and Ollie practically better than I know everybody, like, so it was by no means a given that we would actually kind of get on, and we don't always get on, we have disagreements. But it has advantages in the fact that I guess there's no personal relationship at stake there. It's not like if we ever fell out and went our separate ways, there isn't like there's a friendship that's going to kind of be soured as a result. But when back in that kind of early sort of time, I was kind of like, I guess I enjoying my job working for an agency, but I was looking for something that was going to be a bit more meaningful and have a bit more of a longer term impact. Right. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, we're going to build $1 billion company, or we're going to build this huge kind of success. That was never what it was about, I don't think. It was just really, I was interested in building something and getting it into the hands of users and going through that whole personal process for me. And I think like for the other guys, it was a little bit of that as well. And it was a really slow process over time of that evolving into something like, well, actually this could be a proper business, or this could be quite a large business, or this could have quite a big impact. And so, I was never super ambitious, like shooting for, a unicorn, whatever it was. I was never shooting for that from day one. It was something that kind of gradually evolved and happened over time.
And so thinking of that, of your mindsets about really wanting to make an impact, but not necessarily being high growth driven. Was that something that you three shared? Did you feel differently about it? Was that a very deliberate decision at the beginning in terms of the pace of growth and development of FreeAgent?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think as a more general point, it's really important that co-founders in general check in all the time with each other, because I know our thinking around that has evolved quite a lot over the last 12 years. I'm a lot more ambitious now than I was back in 2007. Now I am actually thinking we can make a huge impact with this business, and it can be with this massive success. But that's something that has had to happen quite slowly. And so I think it's really important that you're always checking in with one another about, why are we doing this? Where are you at right now? Where do you see the future going? You can't predict everything, but in 3 years' time, do you see us doing an exit, or do you see us sticking with the business? And so we've done that a little bit, and I would say that maybe there's been times when one person was more leaning towards one way, or somebody else is leaning towards the other way, but we've always kind of like managed to kind of like bring it together. But I think it is really important you're having those conversations, not every week, but you're checking in every sort of like few months.
What do they look like? Because we kind of touched on that earlier this morning, in terms of that might not be a very natural thought pattern and conversation pattern for many people. Actually, what do you think about this? Where are we going? How do you, especially in the early days, and if you've not been friends before, how do you start having those conversations, and difficult conversations sometimes?
I think there's definitely there are crunch points when you have to have those conversations, and that's like if you're going to take a round of investment, if you're going to take VC money, then you're creating an expectation that there's going to be some sort of liquidity event, there's going to be some sort of exit on the business. So there are points where it's like you need to have your sort of like ducks in a row. You need to be all aligned with that kind of stuff. And the worst thing you could do is be able to sleepwalk into one of those situations or one of those decisions without a clear understanding of the consequences down the line. Because when you're running a startup, pretty much everything you can fix. But if you make a bad investment decision, it's one of the kind of things that is incredibly difficult to wind back from. So I think that's a kind of what I'd say there. I think about it, just generally speaking for us, it's like, this was our first business. I'd done freelance work, and then we were contractors, but we'd never run a business before. So it wasn't, we were coming at it from the angle. I remember we used to always kind of joke that, this is cool, but we're never going to run a 50-person business. And that was a kind of thing we always said, we're never going to run a 50, that sounds like that's going to be no fun at all. And we got to like 40 people, and we're like, well, 50 people isn't going to be so bad, but we're not going to run a 100-person business. And then we got to 90 people, and now we're at nearly 200, as I say, and we're, is it going to be more than that? Well, it could be. So for us, it was just this almost like those little stepping stones we're kind of saying, well, this is where we are now. What does the next year look like? Not 10 years, not 6 months, but what's the next year or 2 years going to look like? And are we comfortable with the path that we're going on? And, just going back to that point of investment, that's one of the things where you really need to be comfortable, because you are giving it to yourself a little bit of expectation in terms of your investors, obviously. So I think I think they were the points, and we were raising money, I would say at least once, maybe twice a year. For us, the way that we did it was slightly unusual, and we didn't do like a big round. We've never raised an absolutely crazy round. Before we are acquired, we raised about 50 million in total over like 11 years, and about half of that was our IPO. So you see that we actually raised relatively small amounts of money regularly, as opposed to some big huge rounds again. So there wasn't ever this like massive leap into a big sort of like commitment with a sort of like a VC or something.
So in terms of role divisions, how did you do that? Because that's a lot of raising. That's continuously being out raising. Was that Ed leading on that, and you guys dividing product, or how did, especially as three kind of technically minded founders, how did you divide up those roles?
Yeah, so I think that happened fairly naturally, but that was more by luck than anything else. I think that's basically when Ed naturally went into that kind of like CEO leadership role. He was, we're doing all this sort of investment and raising and a lot more than just like running the company. And then Ollie was like, he was obviously always going to be the CTO because he was the one sort of strong technically. because I was from a design background, I was always kind of championing the user side of it, because I think designers kind of like tend to do that. I was, you know, very interested in user experience, and so it just kind of became natural for me to do product, Ollie to do CTO, and Ed to run the kind of business. But I think we were kind of lucky in that we were just naturally playing to our strengths in that regard. It might not always be that clear cut and that simple, depending on like who's doing what and who the co-founders are. So, you know, it may need to be that there's a little bit more of a deliberate conversation about that, but you know, for us, it was fairly straightforward. It was fairly easy.
So when you were kind of creating your role and how much that must have changed over the past 12 years, how have you kind of shaped that for yourself, upskilled yourself in what you've needed to do to now grow to the size that you guys are? Yeah,
I think that's because I wasn't, like, when I took on that role, I didn't.
Right, you're not a product manager.
I wasn't. I don't know. There was like product managers.
Like, what is that?
The thing is, this was like, you know, 2009 maybe, when I kind of like officially got that title. So it wasn't even a particular role that was particularly well known. So I just read a lot of books. Like literally, that's what I was doing. I was kind of doing it naturally anyway, in terms of like deciding what we were going to do, what we were going to work on. But the team was so small at that point. You know, we had an engineering team of maybe like 4 or 5 people. So everybody was like sat around the same table basically. And we would have, you know, obviously at that point, everybody was kind of like very much inputting into the roadmap and what we were working on a sort of like day-to-day basis. It wasn't quite as structured as it is now. But it's just over time, it's just been a case of me just, as the team's growing, knowing when and where we need to put in processes and what my role is, and both like thinking about what those processes are, but also about the sort of implementation and day-to-day execution of them. And it's just been quite a slow process, because as a company, we've not had some crazy hockey stick growth, either in terms of, you know, our customer numbers or revenue, or in terms of the size of the company as well. We're quite a decent sized business now, but it's taken us 12 years to get where we are. So it's really just been this slow and steady kind of like chipping away almost, and kind of like growing, which has been, you know, obviously I think businesses always want to grow as quickly as they can. I think the advantage of what it's had personally at FreeAgent is it's allowed me to grow as an individual and to grow into that particular role, and what it means to sort of like run a company of 50 people or 100 people or 200 people, and actually learn as I've gone to having. It wasn't just like you're, you know, completely dropped into the deep end.
That's really interesting.
I've appreciated that quite a lot.
Yeah, to hear you say that you kind of like grown along with the company rather than the company scaling so fast that that could have potentially left any co-founding team behind.
Yeah, I think it's really, you know, sometimes people outgrow companies, and certainly you see that where, you know, the company's at a stage and somebody's wanting to move on, and other times companies outgrow people, and something might be growing so quickly that you just have to say, do you know what, I'm not the right person to do this right now, because it's just, you need somebody with more experience of the scale or whatever the challenges that the company are going through. But luckily for the co-founders at least, I think it has grown at that rate that's allowed us to kind of keep up and learn.
I would love to explore with you a little bit about the kind of team management processes that you use, and particularly how much goes into enabling team members to have their own agency, feel empowered, make their own decisions. Can you tell me a little bit about that at FreeAgent? Yeah,
I think that's been probably one of the hardest things I think that any kind of company has to do. We've worked really hard at that over the last year or so. And I think, so we have multiple product teams now. We have maybe something like 10 different sort of product and engineering teams. And we have about sort of 6 product managers that are in charge of those teams, and they work closely alongside engineering team leads and designers and engineers within those teams. So really each of those teams is, I mean, not entirely autonomous, but they have a lot of control over what they do. And the really important thing is, how do you go about giving that team that level of autonomy? Because it's not just about saying, right, there you go guys, crack on, do what you want, and then kind of come back and speak to me when it's done. That's not what it's about. You need to give people the context, you need to give people the direction, all the setting the scene, understanding the business priorities. You need to be able to do all of that stuff in order for them to be able to have the direction that they need to make the right decisions and take the business in the right direction. So we have this kind of process that we've been working on over the last couple of years, I guess, where, I mean, we try and keep it really simple, but every team has its own mini strategy effectively. So we have that as a company level, and at a business level, we say, this is our mission as a business. Here's how we think we're going to achieve that mission, and with regards to what we call strategic anchors. And then here are our highest level KPIs. We talk about something called a balanced scorecard, which is like how we measure different KPIs across different dimensions across the business. So yeah, there's revenue ones, financial stuff in there, but also about how happy our team is internally, because that's really important. How happy are our customers, because that's a really important thing as well. And then we think about, okay, what are our tactics and roadmaps and resource requirements and so on and so on. So we basically just take that model and then we shrink it down to a small level at the teams. So every single team has a mission, they have a key sort of strategies, they have a scorecard, a balanced scorecard of KPIs which reflect the different things, responsibilities that team might have, because usually teams are, even internally, are still juggling different sets of priorities. It might be releasing new features, like fixing bugs, technical debt, all of these type of things. And then a roadmap comes off the back of that. And so it's just really repeating that kind of process and just applying it at different levels across the business. And when they've got that, and what we're at the stage now where all our teams have got these, now they've got everything that they need. They understand why they're doing what they're doing, how that links in with the higher level strategy, the business impact they're trying to have. They understand what metrics and KPIs they're optimizing for. They know their strategy's been agreed and so on. So I spend quite a lot of time working on, that's what I do, is really work with the teams on those strategies. And once they're in place, it's kind of like, okay, well, now you guys have a really sort of like the right context. You know how you're going to impact the wider business, and you have a clear sense of direction. Now you can really own that and really execute on that. So I think that's actually one of the things I think we've done most successfully over the last couple of years. So that's kind of how we do it.
I think it definitely makes sense in terms of the scale that you guys are at. Can you remember and think back as to when did you know, oh, we're over processing for the scale right now, or the reverse, we really need to get some processes in place because of what we're doing right now? So thinking back over that 12-year journey, were there times where you thought either one of those?
Yeah, I think so. I think traditionally what you would say is that startups tend to be more scared of introducing process early on, especially the type of people that typically join early stage startups. The last thing they want to be is some big corporate kind of like company that's like driven by massive amounts of process, and they feel it's going to slow them down and red tape. That's kind of my experience of not just founders, but the early sort of engineers or designers or everybody. They'd want to kind of minimize that stuff. So I think there's a fear of that. I think what I'd say from my sort of experience I've got now is it's rarely as bad as you think it's going to be, and if you don't do it, it's quite often worse. So thinking about that process, introducing it in a way which doesn't feel too constrictive or something that doesn't feel like it's completely swamping people, it can actually, and if you can demonstrate the value in terms of, listen, we're just putting in some guidelines here. This doesn't have to be completely dogmatic. It doesn't mean that we're all going to have to wear like suits and ties, but this is about helping us work more efficiently together, and you can demonstrate the value in it, then quite quickly I think people kind of come and say, oh yeah, do you know what, it's kind of not actually as bad. So I think normally when we discovered things was when we were left it too late, and things just felt too scrappy, and people were just going, oh my God, what the hell are we doing here? We don't like for us, like when we started out, we would have stand-ups that lasted 45 minutes. Right. So every morning it was like 45 minutes of arguing what we were going to be doing for the day, because we hadn't gone through the process of like, okay, figuring out a roadmap, grooming our backlog, understanding what was going on in the sprint, all of that stuff. That stuff wasn't there, and it was just kind of like too loose and scrappy. So that was a kind of real sign where people were hating that, and we knew we had to do something about it and just a little bit more rigor.
So I'm really interested about that resistance that you definitely are going to get. You mentioned engineers. It could be any kind of team member, and you talked about demonstrating the value. When you're in a position, and maybe that's because you've gone too far and you've just not planned enough, but you feel like firefighting all day, every day. What case do you make to someone to take the time out to plan when they think, I can't possibly take the time out to plan? Like, I'm fighting fires. Yeah, I think
that's if there's the argument that we're too busy putting out a fire to actually, I don't know, like fix the fire later on, that's a really that's a sign that you need to fix something.
Yeah.
And I think we've definitely sort of seen that situation. You see that, especially around kind of moments of crisis, is when we've had that. It's kind of sometimes it's like something really badly has gone on. Your database has gone down, or something's broken, your app's kind of broken, and that's when we're like, sometimes you just need to say, we need to stop and talk about what's going on right now to manage all aspects of this kind of difficult situation, how we communicate with customers, what we're going to do to resolve it. And in that situation, you get to think, well, okay, we don't have time because we've just got to fix this thing. And you have to say, no, we need to talk about this thing because it's actually important that we have a joined up approach to doing this. So that's a very intense version of that, but it's the same kind of like idea that there's a bigger problem. That's the reason that we are having to spending our time fighting fires. And it's probably because we're not able to prioritize our work effectively enough, or we don't understand what we're trying to aim at, or maybe there's a mismatch between management and the people who are actually kind of like building the product, because it's not clear. Like the manager thinks we need to be doing this thing, and the engineers think we need to be thinking there. So there's a breakdown in communication about what the priorities should be. And it's only by having that conversation, and you can really bottom all of that stuff out. Like, these are the business priorities, but actually, the product's a mess, or we need to fix this. And it's only by having that you can then start to set or put in some guidelines, some prioritization around things, KPIs if that's going to be useful at that point. And I think you need to do that. You need to take that step back. And I think that one of the roles of leadership is to be able to do that, is to be able to help people see the bigger picture, but crucially, making sure that they're included in that as well, so they can see the benefit of them taking part in that conversation, so they don't just feel like, I'm going to be sitting in some meeting that I can't contribute to. I think that's really important as well.
I can definitely see how that process, post-product market fit, is super beneficial. How do you think that is something that can be implemented when you're talking about everyone needs to know business direction? What if that direction is changing all the time because you're still seeking product market fit? So where do kind of KPIs and structure, do they have a place still in that early exploration phase?
I think probably less so. I think that's the kind of thing. I think it's difficult because it wasn't something that we ever had. We were lucky, right? We built an accounting software product, and people just need accounting software. That was one of the things. It's like you've got different challenges with that market, but understanding whether or not people needed it was never like a deal for us. It's whether or not the product was good enough, or whether or not it was better than the competitors. They were the things that were like kind of worried to us. But we were never really worried about, is this something that people would genuinely even want at all? I mean, that said, we didn't put in any of those KPIs in the early days. That was much later that we kind of brought that stuff in. So I think I can completely see that. You've got, in those early days, there's probably not a huge amount of time, optimizing the performance of your database if you don't even know if your product's going to be around in like 6 months or something like that. So I definitely think that there's an argument in that very early days. It's like you're just optimizing to find out if this is actually something that people want. And I think, but at the same time, you've got to then say, how will we know if we've achieved product market fit?
And then at least that's the clear question.
At least you can have a clear question there. If it's just this vague nebulous thing where, okay, well, we spoke to some people and they quite liked it, or we've got a few customers. If you can't say, well, if we've not achieved this by then we can kind of say, well, maybe we're not onto something. Then it gives something for a focus for people to rally around. Again, we use OKRs quite heavily at FreeAgent. It's a big focus for us. And that allows us to say, well, okay, here's a time frame, here's what we want to achieve, and here are the key results that will tell us if we've actually achieved that in that particular time frame. So it's something for the whole business to kind of rally around. Everybody buys into that, and you can say, well, we need to prove product market fit by 4 months' time or whatever it's going to be, and this is what we will know if we hit these particular things. Then we can be confident that's the case. So I think as much as you can get that stuff, and again, that feels like process. It feels like, oh no, it feels we're not Google or IBM or whatever. But it's that kind of thing, which is just, it's about alignment, and it's like about communication. So I think you're never too early stage to be talking about communication and alignment.
Yeah, and that's a fair challenge. I would be interested, because part of our aim in this week from the kind of zero to revenue point of view is to pull back the curtain on the realities of startup life. Part of what we're aiming to explore is, when we go through something, afterwards, when we look back at it with hindsight, we kind of tell the story in a different way, right? And it's just natural, is it? We all do it. It could be like, I went for a run earlier, it was great, it was raining, it was miserable, it was dark. Can you think of times during your journey in FreeAgent, whether that's your personal journey or as a team? Now there's probably a way that you tell the story, but at the time, like, how did it actually feel?
I mean, for sure, there's a public version of events, and there's kind of like what actually happened, and there's things that there's things that we will talk about publicly, and there's going to be stuff we're not going to be talking about publicly.
For sure.
Because it was there. I think it's always going to be like that for everything as well. I mean, there's been times when I think some of these really difficult, I know from speaking for myself personally, some of the toughest times was when it felt like there there was all these fires to put out, but at the same time, we knew we had to move the business forward, and there just clearly just wasn't enough resource to go around to do all of these things, and it just felt like a continual struggle or battle making these things, and that made it just, I mean, people were just not getting on. They were grumpy because either they were always like doing something, and you knew there was something else that they really should be doing as well, and that could be that can be quite a difficult phase, because it just feels like it's a continual battle, and people are kind of like coming at things from really good places and well-intentioned places, but there's just there's an irreconcilable conflict that's going on there, and that can be really tough. And we went through that for quite a long time. Like I say, we grew quite slowly, so we didn't raise like 5 million, hire 40 people, and then start all this stuff up. It was just like, okay, we've got another engineer starting next month or a couple months after that or something. So some of these conflicts like felt quite tough, but it got better. It did get better.
Was that just time? Like, what was that process of improving the feeling of cohesion?
Yeah. So I think it was introducing a bit more process about saying, well, this is what's important to us, and it wasn't just kind of like me moaning about us not doing this thing, or somebody else moaning about not doing that thing over there, where it just feels like it's kind of quite demoralizing. It was kind of like, well, listen, we're all going to buy into this is a priority, and this is what we need to do. So I think like bringing them some of that process and structure was definitely a really important part of it. The other thing, and I think this is really important, is just how you structure and manage your people and your effort, your time and resources anyway. And if you're a team of 4 people, well, those 4 people are either working on that thing or they're working on that thing over there. But when you get to a team of like 10 people, then you can have, well, these 5 people are working on this thing, and these 5 people are working on that other thing over there. And when you get to 20 people, you can have like 4 teams. And that actually makes things a lot easier, because then you can start to sort of say, okay, well, as a business, what things are important to us? We know this is important, we know that's important, we know that's important. We're going to manage and we're going to resource those things separately. And then within those teams, there's still always good discussions about what's a priority at any one time. But it means that those discussions and those conflicts, they're not kind of coming from some like zero baseline, like, well, it's a little bit more focused and it's a bit more structured. So I think partly it is about bringing in some of those processes. I mentioned some OKRs and things, but partly it's just about having the capacity in order to be able to do a little bit more and create a little bit more structure around the teams that you've got. That's obviously a luxury. If you're a super early stage, that's not something you're going to have. So I think you need to think about, okay, it's not necessarily in terms of dedicated teams, it's about dedicated time. So one of the things that we do, even within the teams that we've got now, is we say, a day a week is just spent fixing bugs. So 20% of our engineers' time is typically spent fixing bugs, and that time's carved out, sacrosanct, and we all, it's like a Thursday or it's a Friday, and that it takes that thing out. It's not like, oh, do we need to do this thing this week, or there's none of that conversations go on, because it's been agreed, it's set in stone, and it's one less thing to kind of worry about. And as long as that time is enough, and that's a different question, but as long as that time's enough, then it just creates that space for something, and it's one less thing to kind of like worry about.
So I know that you described that back in the beginning you guys kind of came together and you were starting the company. At what point did culture become something that you were deliberately mindful about, and about when you were growing the team, about what culture would be shared between you? We were this was like 2007, so like web apps were starting to be a thing, tech companies were becoming a bit of a thing. It wasn't like culture was never something that we were ever aware of. I think the point at which you have to articulate your culture, that's something which there's maybe a point later on, because as everybody says, in the early days, culture is just how everything gets done. And if you've got 5 people around a table or 10 people, then the culture is fairly sort of self-evident. You don't need to do very much to kind of maintain that, because everybody sees how everybody acts towards each other. I think as the company grows, as you do get these different teams sort of splitting off, then you have the possibility of different people doing things in a different way around the organization. And that's not necessarily a totally bad thing, not everybody's the same, not every teams are the same. But that's when it is important that you talk about, well, these are the things that we're always consistent on.
and these are the types of behaviours that are non-negotiable, and this is how we kind of behave towards each other. So, I mean, we were quite late in hiring what we call our people operations kind of team. We only really did that sort of 3-4 years ago. So we were that was quite late on, but it was really at that point we started to be much more, I guess, proactive about thinking about our culture. Because up until then it had just been like, well, it's just what everybody kind of does. I think we potentially left that a little bit too late. Again, it's one of these. There's people sometimes have a bit of this kind of gut reaction where, we don't want to write our culture down because it feels like some like horrible like corporate thing where you've got it printed on your walls or something like that. And sometimes there's a bit of a kind of pushback about that sort of thing. But that's certainly by no means like how you go about implementing culture in an organisation. But it is important to talk about it, and it is important to write it down. And one of the things that we do have now is a set of values that that work alongside those strategic anchors that I mentioned before. They're sort of like two very sort of like complementary parts, and we talk about those a lot. I mean, we consciously think about how we embed those in many of the processes that we use, from hiring to promotions and all of that kind of sort of stuff. And so it's important to think about not only what your values are, but then how you're going to actually live them and how you're going to use them.
I'm really interested from especially a product perspective, with all the process that you've described, what space and how do you enable creativity and innovation to happen within that structure? Yeah,
I think that's a really good point, because I think it's definitely one of the things that you see is that if everything's like just like a machine, in some ways that's kind of good, because you've got a clear idea and just go, but at the same time you definitely get sometimes when people are just kind of like, oh man, I just want like a little bit of time just to go off and experiment stuff, or just to play about with things. And we've definitely had that's feedback that we get at FreeAgent. Over the last kind of couple of years, we've done a couple of things around that seem to be working quite well. So we do these hack days, so we do those twice a year, and it's a couple of days at a time where we bring everybody in the company together. We have people that work remotely, so about 20-25% of our engineering team, but we'll bring them into the office and we'll bring everybody else around. And that's a chance where we just sort of down tools and normal day-to-day work, and everybody just gets a chance to work on anything that they want. It could be absolutely sort of anything that they want to experiment with. So that's one thing that we do, and we find that's quite successful. Within the last sort of a year, we've changed the way that we do our planning sort of cycles. So we used to work on quarter, sort of like 3 monthly sort of cycles, and then we would do a lot of planning at the end of that, and we go straight into the next cycle, a lot of planning straight into the next kind of cycle. Now what we do is we have a week buffer between 2 monthly blocks, and that's how we kind of work it. So in that week buffer, that's when, for example, the Proto Managers and the team leads, they'll be doing the planning and they'll be trying to set the OKRs, but the rest we call it Wiggle Week, because the rest of the company can basically just, again, do whatever they want for that particular week. So every couple of months, now they've got a whole week where they can just experiment with a new technology, or play about with a new feature, or maybe sort of finishing off something that they've had lying about and never had the time to pick up again. And just again, it's all about introducing that dedicated and resource and managed time. If you just leave these things to kind of like, well, hopefully somebody will just kind of come around with some amazing innovative idea, they won't, because they've got their job to do, and they've got stuff to do. Somebody's always there, come on, where's this thing? So if you carve out that time and give people that space and be mindful about it and be sort of like dedicated about it, then we've seen some, even though we've only been doing that for maybe 9 months, we've already started to see some really interesting ideas and projects come out of that sort of Wiggle Week idea. So there's a couple of things that we kind of do, that we've been doing about that.
How do you make people then feel that what they create within that Wiggle Week then has value, that it's going to go somewhere, it's going to go on to the next, like what happens after that?
Yeah, so I think that's another thing, because the problem is that once that kind of Wiggle Week's done, people are back onto the kind of roadmaps again. So, and the danger is that people do all this kind of great work and it just gets forgotten about it. And again, so that's a bit of a challenge. But it's the same thing that we've got with hack days as well. And but what we've basically seen is that sometimes we try and make sure that the best ideas that come out of that, they're working with the product managers or they're working with the team leads to really see, okay, well, wow, this was really exciting. Let's look at how we can work this into the roadmap. So they're working within their teams already. I wouldn't say that's always like a completely easy process, but we're trying to create that space where we're not just forgetting about that stuff. It can actually be taken into the roadmaps and planned in. I think sometimes the problem is like it's sometimes it can be easy to put something together that looks fairly credible in a few days, but actually to get that production ready, to get that like all completely polished into the standard we want, actually takes a lot longer. So it almost sometimes creates this false expectation of, oh wait, we've got this amazing demo, this thing's done. Actually there's another like 2 months of like really hard work to get this thing really sort of polished and sort of production ready. So that can be a bit of a challenge there, but we're trying to do that as much as we can.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would be interested in hearing, I guess, everything that you're describing in terms of process, and you've described how sometimes it's changed or you've tweaked it.
Yeah.
Is your mindset, this is an experiment I'm running, I'm seeing what the feedback is, and I'll tweak it? Is that the way that you kind of do the people management aspect as well?
Yeah, I think so, and I think we're quite open about that. I certainly think we've done stuff that hasn't worked, and we've had to say, well, you know, maybe it wasn't such a great idea after all. Those changes that I mentioned recently, there was a lot of feedback we were getting. People didn't feel they had enough space for innovation. Actually, our planning process previously felt very long, and people were saying we're spending weeks doing planning, which we weren't actually doing sort of like making stuff. So that was the kind of feedback. And so we just thought, okay, well, maybe what's one thing that we could do? And I remember being like a little bit worried about it. I thought actually it's just going to go really, really badly wrong. And so when we kind of like pitched it to the team, we said, listen, there's a bunch of stuff that we know is working well from this process. Here's what you're telling us isn't working well. You know, we agree. This is an idea that we've got, how we might go about changing that. What does everybody think? And we said, oh, yeah, okay, we'll give it a shot. And we tried it for a few sort of like cycles, and I think you have to. I don't think it's sometimes especially for a larger organization, you don't want to try something for a few months and give up because you've got some like teething problems. You've got to say, come on, we're going to commit to this for a little while. We'll go through some of the choppy water. And so we did that, and it was okay, well, it's not perfect, but it's probably better than what we're having before, so let's kind of like take this and work with it for now. And I'm sure there'll be other iterations that we do, but I think it is just about being really open and honest with the team and saying, listen, we don't have all the answers here. Yeah. You know, I've never run a company of this kind of size, and I'm always pretty open and honest about that. And every company's different as well, every team's different. So I think it's just about being open and honest, and sort of people are always, and also including them in that process as well, because if you're saying, well, we don't have all the answers, what do you think? Here's our ideas. And then you almost kind of co-create those processes. Right. And that's some of the bigger changes I think we've done have been very much put in place in tandem with the team's input and their ideas as well.
So that sounds like a really interesting journey in terms of being really transparent about your experience and the co-creation. How do you see that going forward? You know, at what point, how big do FreeAgent grow? At what point does your role change? How do you see the future?
Yeah, well, my role's very different now. I mean, what it was, I'm not really sort of like hands-on at all with the kind of product in the same way as I was before, and now sort of I manage a team of product managers, so it's really about helping them and empowering them to sort of take it forward in the direction that we wanted to. So it is very, very different. Also being part of the RBS group as well, my role is quite different there because I spend quite a lot of time interfacing with like senior people at that side and understanding that sort of being a bit of a bridge between our two organisations. So it's quite different from that regard. But I don't think our culture's changed. I don't think our transparency's changed at all. We were, you know, going through that kind of growth phase in the acquisition. We were pretty clear, and actually RBS were as well. They were like, we don't want to change your culture because you guys are clearly, you know, you've built a great product that people love. You have a great team of really smart people who are like working hard and producing some great results. You know, they don't want to come in and mess with that. And so that was a message that we gave at the time. It's just like, you know, we want to keep our culture or improve our culture, you know. And so, like, I think at the time of the acquisition, there was probably people who were like, okay, that's great, but how is it actually going to work out? You know, there's some understandable sort of skepticism in there, which I completely get. But what I think we have done is I think we've proven over the last sort of, whatever it is, 8 months or so, that, you know, we haven't become some really sort of corporate, overwhelmed, boring kind of company. It hasn't affected our culture in any way. And so I think that's it. You've just got to prove that you can really back that up, and you can really double down on the culture that you have.
Over that period of 12 years or so, if you guys have grown, I guess there must have been a lot of people who have come and gone, who have joined and who've left. How have you found that in terms of supporting leaders and their development and versus individual contributors, and when people have come and tried something and decided it's not for them? Like, what's that journey been like in terms of the people?
Yeah, it's a great question actually. I think so. One of the things that we did was when we started thinking about the structure of our teams, we introduced, it's fairly standard now, we introduced an individual contributor track and we introduced a manager track. And it wasn't necessarily like managers were more senior than individual contributors. And it's entirely possible at FreeAgent that an IC can be more senior than the person managing them. That's actually kind of possible. So it was really important to sort of like point out that you've got these two different ways that somebody can, and this is more on the product side of kind of like, this is more of a kind of product and engineering and sort of design thing. But there's two different ways that people can progress in that regard. And it's not like, well, as you get more senior, your next step is obviously management, because a lot of people just don't want to make that step. And we have people that have made that step and realized it's not for them and they want to go back. And so we support them. And that's not seen as like a bad thing at all. And then I've got somebody on one of my teams is actually making that transition right now. Yeah. And that's absolutely great. That's something I want. If somebody realizes that that's where their passion is, that's where they want to be, then I'll make sure that I support that person in that kind of move. So I think it's just about having these two tracks, and then within those two tracks, making it very clear about what the progression actually is. So again, it feels like it's one of these kind of like quite process heavy things, but having clear roles and expectations for the different levels in a particular role, as a junior engineer, mid-level engineer, senior, principal, that sort of thing. And then really people understanding where their next step in the organization is, where they're going to go, and what they need to do to get there, because that's really how you let people have that sort of career progression. And it's not to say that there's sometimes you get to the stage where somebody's, like I say, outgrowing the company, they've got to the top of that ladder, and they're looking around saying, really, unless I'm going to get Roan's job, there's no real for me to go in this kind of ways. And that's point maybe where they choose to kind of move on from the business. And again, you've got to support somebody in that decision. We don't like to do that. We don't like to lose people, obviously, but sometimes it's the right thing for kind of like both parties. But you just, as long as people at least understand where they are and where they can go and what their opportunities are available to them.
I would just sticking on the people question, I want to pick into one point. When you guys were initially starting to grow back in the early days, and you've done a bit of a skills analysis and recognise, what gaps do we need to plug? How do you go about filling those gaps with skills people at the right level that you needed to support where you didn't have the experience and the expertise?
Yeah, I think that's another really good one. I think so. I would say there's the three of us, which in one sense was good because we had a little bit of strength in numbers. You see companies that have got like a single founder, it can be tough because there's a lot of responsibility on their shoulders and they've really got to wear lots of hats. We were all kind of technical, but I wouldn't say we were only technical. Like Ed has a very, very strong sort of business acumen. We are pretty strong in different areas as well. So we weren't like just one trick ponies, I guess, the kind of three of us, and we could share a lot of that stuff around. But quite early on, we did realize that what we didn't really have was any particular sales experience or any particular marketing experience. And one of the things I think that we did right, and one of the things that I see early stage startups doing wrong, is they wait too long to get senior people on their leadership team. And I know it's difficult because the last thing that maybe an early stage startup wants to do is spend a lot of money on like a senior leadership team, but actually is one of the things that we did really early is we brought on board Kevin McCallum, who was a sort of like a business development director, and Sam Wilson, who was our communications marketing kind of director. And they really kind of were brought in, and it was their responsibility to set the strategies for those areas, build the team in a way that we just didn't have that experience, right? We could have muddled through maybe and done a great job of it, and it just would have been a distraction from Mikey's building the product, something like that. Ed's running the company, getting investment, and so we brought those kind of early on, and then later on like a sort of CFO and things like that, and that's really what like made a really rounded senior sort of leadership like team. And that was I really credit that with a lot of the success that we had because we did that fairly early. I think I see a lot of sort of early stage founders, and they try and do all of that stuff for way too long, and they lose focus on stuff that maybe they're not good at anyway. So they're trying to do something. They're trying to do sales, and they're never going to be able to build a great sales team. Or they're trying to do marketing. They don't know anything about marketing, and at the same time, it's taking them away from stuff that they should be looking at. So that's what I always kind of say is like really think about that leadership team early and try and get it in place as quickly as you can.
So to finish up, just for our early stage founders that might be watching and they've listened to you and they've said, yeah, me and my team spend too much of our time running around like headless chickens, we don't have a process. What's a good starting point, whether it's some of the things that you have read, or where would you recommend they start?
Wow, that's a tricky one. I think partly it's about speaking to as many other companies as you can. I think Edinburgh is great because more and more there are different events, there are different communities that are kind of going around, Product Tank, and there's things like Turing Fest, and there's lots of other meetups around. So I think it's really important you just get out there and talk to other people who've been kind of like through this at different stages. Either somebody's going through exactly the same problems that you are, somebody's a year on and they've maybe made a little bit of a jump up from there and things like that. I think that would be my number one thing is like just try and get as much support from the community as you possibly can. And I think we're lucky in Edinburgh in that we're really starting to build that community and support around sort of like tech, which I think is amazing. So I think that would be that'd be the important thing. Beyond then, I think it's just about trying to read as much as you can about what are some of the. I think the thing is as well is like it's 12 years since FreeAgent started, and 20 years since you had sort of until you had sort of like tech companies, tech startups around that time. So a lot of the problems that people are going through, like building a sales team, it's kind of a solved problem. You don't have to start from scratch in this stuff. Yeah. Understanding how to run a product team, people have been there and done this. There people have written books about it. They've written blog posts about it. So you don't have to figure all this stuff out from scratch. You still need to find a product that people love. You still need to find product market fit. It's a
big enough challenge.
That's going to be hard enough. But actually looking at how you go about some of this process stuff, there are rules, there are playbooks for this stuff. How you raise investment. There's a lot being written about this as well. So you don't have to figure all of this stuff out for yourself. So it's whether or not you're reading books or you're looking at sort of stuff online, or you're just kind of like speaking to people who've been there, done that, and got the T-shirt. I think that's probably the best way of doing it.
Well, thanks for being part of that today. You have come in and given us your experience, and we really appreciate that. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers.